The rare, damp chill of a Los Angeles morning cut through the streets of Beverly Hills that December, carrying a fine drizzle that clung to the air before vanishing on the glistening asphalt. A stark contrast to the usual California sun. Not even this uncharacteristic cold could mute the perpetual hum of the city of dreams. Storefronts along Rodeo Drive were already aglow with lavish holiday displays, creating an almost cruel juxtaposition between their festive sparkle and the harsh reality of the chilly streets, amidst the glamorous crowd flowing like a human tide. Two small figures stood out, not for their height, which barely reached the waists of the designer-clad adults around them, but for the uncanny synchronicity they possessed. They were like two identical stars in the urban galaxy. The same down to the last detail. Madison and Harper walked hand in hand, their steps perfectly aligned, as if they were one soul inhabiting two bodies. Their identical brown hair, though tangled, framed faces that seemed sculpted by the same careful artist. Their cheeks, usually rosy, were pale from the cold, and their small lips trembled slightly despite their efforts to project bravery. At 4 years old, the twins already knew more about survival than any child should. Their clothes, several sizes too big, were donations from a local church. The single coat they shared, taking turns every few hours, had been found in a dumpster behind a high-end boutique. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I'm cold," Harper whispered, squeezing her sister's hand tighter. Her tiny fingers fiddled absent-mindedly with a silver ring that dangled from a cord around her neck, a nervous habit that intensified when she was anxious. The cold metal against her skin was, paradoxically, a source of comfort. It was the only thing they had brought from the orphanage, besides the memories they tried so hard to forget. "I know, Harps. Let's try that cafe again." "Remember the nice man who gave us a muffin yesterday?" Madison replied, effortlessly assuming the role of protector she had taken on since they ran away from Sunshine Orphanage 3 weeks prior. Her voice, though childish, held a premature gravity that could shatter the heart of anyone who paid attention. The bustling cafe had become a temporary sanctuary in recent days. The warmth that spilled out each time the door opened was like a fleeting embrace, and the aroma of roasted coffee and fresh pastries reminded their empty stomachs they hadn't eaten since the previous day. It was infinitely better than the overcrowded orphanage, where they shared a small cot with 3 other children, where breakfast was a single slice of dry toast for every 2 kids, where the director's yelling echoed through the dark corridors long after the lights went out. In the weeks they'd spent on the streets, the girls had carved out a routine. They woke before dawn, leaving the small alcove they'd found behind an old abandoned cinema. The groundskeeper, an elderly man who pretended not to see them, would sometimes leave forgotten blankets near the back exit. It was more kindness than they had ever known at the orphanage. That was when something caught Madison's eye. Her gaze, always sharp, spotted a furtive movement in the crowd. A lanky man in a worn-out jacket that had seen better days was stealthily closing in on another man, this one in a pristine suit that likely cost more than everything in the cinemas lost and found combined. The man in the suit was deep in a phone call, gesturing with his free hand as he talked about funding rounds and IPOs. The pickpocket's hand moved with the precision of a snake about to strike. "Harps, look," Madison whispered, and without another word, the two acted in perfect unison. It was a dance they had perfected in their weeks on the streets, not to steal, as so many other abandoned children were forced to do, but to stop others from stealing. It was their own small way of injecting good into a world that hadn't been very kind to them. At the precise moment the pickpocket's hand reached for the suited man's pocket, Harper accidentally tripped and fell, letting out a sharp cry that made everyone around them pause. Her small hand scraped against the cold, wet concrete, but she held back her tears. Madison, following the unspoken plan they had developed, rushed to help her sister, accidentally bumping into the thief in the process. The man in the suit, Richard Huntington, though the girls didn't know it yet, finally ended his call and turned around to find a curious scene. 2 identical little girls on the ground, a man stumbling backward with a look of pure frustration, and a small crowd starting to gather. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating after years in the world of venture capital, softened instantly. "Are you all right, little one?" Richard knelt, extending a hand to Harper. His eyes, a deep blue reminiscent of the Pacific on a clear day, met those of the twins, and something in that gaze gave the girls a spark of hope. They hadn't felt in a long time. There was kindness there, buried beneath layers of wealth and corporate power. The pickpocket had already vanished into the crowd. By the time Harper stood up, still clutching the ring around her neck, Madison drew closer, and they exchanged a quick look, the kind of silent communication that only twins seemed to master. In their few years of life, they had already learned to read each other better than any book. "Mister," Madison began, her small but firm voice carrying a courage that would surprise anyone who knew her age. "We saved your wallet." Richard frowned, his hand instinctively patting the pocket of his Italian suit, where his wallet was, indeed, still secure. Years of high-stakes business deals had made him sharp enough to piece the puzzle together quickly. His gaze swept over the scene again, this time paying closer attention to the details. "You," he began, but Harper interrupted him. "We have a request," she said, her fingers still toying with the ring. The weak winter sunlight caught the metal for a moment, making it sparkle. Just a small request. Richard Huntington was not a man known for his patience. As the CEO of the Huntington Group, one of the largest tech incubators on the West Coast, his time was precious and meticulously scheduled. Every minute of his day was accounted for, every meeting a multi-million-dollar opportunity. But something in the eyes of these two girls, a mixture of desperation and hope, fear and courage, made him stay there on the busy sidewalk while the world rushed on around him. And what would that request be? He found himself asking, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. It was a tone he hadn't used in years, not since. Well, since a time he preferred not to remember. The twins looked at each other again before Madison responded. "We want a dad, just for one day." The request hit Richard like a physical blow. Memories he had carefully locked away began to surface. Nights spent sleeping in his car, days of skipping meals, the crushing loneliness of his own difficult youth. He studied the girls more intently, worn clothes too big for their small frames, hair that hadn't seen a comb in days, eyes that held a wisdom far beyond their years. But there was something else, something he couldn't quite place, an unsettling familiarity that made his heart ache in a way it hadn't for a very long time. "Please," Harper added, her small hand still gripping the mysterious ring. Just 24 hours. Richard knew he should call the authorities. He knew there were proper channels for dealing with abandoned children. His assistant, Caroline, was probably having a meltdown over his delay for the first meeting of the day. His schedule was packed with investor pitches and a board dinner. But when he opened his mouth to say no, to do the correct, responsible thing, what came out was, "All right." The smile that lit up the twins' faces was like a sunrise over the Santa Monica Pier. It was a moment of pure magic in the midst of the urban chaos, the kind of moment that makes you believe in fate. If only for a second, Richard found himself smiling back as he guided the girls toward his limousine parked a few yards away. His steps, usually firm and decisive, now adjusted to the pace of the small children. The business world could wait. Some things were more important than contracts and mergers. Walter, his chauffeur of 15 years, wore an unforgettable expression when the doors opened to reveal not just his perpetually serious boss, but also two tiny extra passengers, the man who had seen Richard build his empire from a garage startup, who had driven him through countless negotiations and crises, looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Home, Walter," Richard ordered, helping the girls into the luxurious vehicle. His eyes met the driver's in the rearview mirror, and a silent message passed between them. This was not the time for questions. The limousine's interior was a whole new world for Madison and Harper. Their wide eyes took in every detail, the soft leather seats, the gentle overhead lights that resembled stars, the small built-in fridge stocked with water and juices. It was like stepping into a modern fairy tale. During the ride, Richard noticed how the twins stayed close to each other, whispering amongst themselves and occasionally casting curious glances in his direction. Harper kept fidgeting with the ring on her neck, an object that, although Richard hadn't fully taken note of it yet, would soon change his life forever. The Huntington mansion, with its imposing modern lines and meticulously tended gardens, drew gasps from the twins as the car passed through the wrought iron gates. The estate, located on a prime piece of land in Beverly Hills, looked like something out of a movie. Its light stone walls rose majestically against the winter sky, and the tall windows sparkled in the sunlight like diamonds. The reaction of Agnes, the housekeeper, upon seeing her employer arrive with 2 homeless children was even more memorable than Walter's. The woman, who had served the Huntington family for over 2 decades, dropped the feather duster she was holding, her usually composed face transforming into a mask of shock. "Mr. Huntington," she began, but Richard cut her off with a gesture. He recognized that tone. It was the same tone she used whenever he was about to do something she considered reckless, like when he decided to sell his first condo to invest in a risky startup, or when he bought a private jet without seeing it first. "Please prepare a hot bath for the girls and find them some clean clothes, then arrange for a snack," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. After so many years of service, Agnes knew when her employer was immovable. The twins were led upstairs, their tiny feet making almost no sound on the marble steps. The mansion, which had always felt too big and too empty to Richard, suddenly came alive with the presence of those 2 small visitors. It was as though the very air had changed, as though the walls were breathing for the first time in years. It was during their bath that everything changed. Richard had gone upstairs to check on how things were going. Stopping at the door of the luxurious master bathroom, Agnes was helping Harper take off her dirty shirt, while Madison was already submerged up to her neck in a bathtub filled with bubbles. Steam rose in lazy spirals, fogging the mirrors slightly. Then it happened, the moment that would change everything. The ring slipped off its cord as Harper lifted her arms, swinging in the air for what felt like an eternity before coming to rest on the little girl's chest. The bathroom light caught the metal, making it shine in an almost supernatural way. Time seemed to freeze. Richard felt the air sucked out of his lungs, his legs weakened, and he had to lean on the doorframe to avoid collapsing. The world around him began to spin, and for a moment he was sure he was having a heart attack. That ring, it couldn't be. It was impossible. The same intricate design he had helped create, the same sky-blue stone in the center that he had personally chosen because it reminded him of her eyes. The same small diamonds forming a constellation around it, the constellation Cassiopeia, her favorite. It was identical to the ring he had given Elizabeth 5 years ago. Elizabeth, the name he hadn't allowed himself to think about for so long, exploded in his mind like fireworks, bringing with it a flood of memories. Her smile, the twilight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold through the high windows of the Huntington mansion when Richard finally pulled himself together enough to face the situation. The last few hours had been an emotional whirlwind since he'd seen the ring on Harper's neck. A ring that by all rights should have been buried with Elizabeth 5 years ago. The twins were now sitting in the main living room, dressed in clean clothes provided by Agnes. Their hair, still damp from their bath, had been carefully combed, revealing identical curls that framed faces. Richard now realized with a tightness in his chest bore an uncanny resemblance to someone from his past. "Harper," Richard began, his voice raspier than he intended. "Can you tell me about that ring?" The girl instinctively touched the cord around her neck, her eyes meeting her sister's in one of those silent looks that seemed to contain entire conversations. Madison nodded slightly, as though giving permission. "The kind lady gave it to us," Harper finally answered, her small fingers stroking the sky-blue stone. "She said it would help us find a family." Richard felt his heart skip a beat. "Kind lady?" he repeated, trying to keep his voice calm despite the storm inside him. "What was she like?" The twins exchanged glances again before Madison spoke up. "She had hair like ours," she said, fiddling with the hem of her new shirt. "And she was pretty, really pretty, and gentle," Harper quickly added. "She was always smiling." The description made Richard's stomach churn. Elizabeth had been exactly like that. Naturally wavy brown hair, a smile that lit up any room. But it was impossible. Elizabeth had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. He had identified the body himself, organized the funeral. "When did you last see her?" he asked, struggling to maintain composure. "It was," Madison hesitated, looking at her sister. "Before we ran away from Sunshine, she appeared one night," Harper continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Told us we had to be strong, that one day we would understand everything." Richard slumped into an armchair, his mind spinning. None of this made sense. The ring was unique, custom-made for Elizabeth. The Cassiopeia constellation in diamonds had been his idea, a reference to the first night they met, when she showed him the stars from the university observatory roof. Agnes, who was watching from the door, cleared her throat softly. "Mr. Huntington, the social worker has arrived." Richard nodded distractedly. He had called social services earlier, as protocol demanded. Part of him wanted to ignore all the bureaucracy and keep the girls there until he solved the mystery of the ring. But he knew he had to do things the right way. Jennifer Davis entered the room with the confidence of someone who had seen it all in her 15 years of social work. Her sharp eyes quickly cataloged the scene. 2 clean, well-dressed girls, a visibly shaken billionaire, and a concerned housekeeper standing at the door. "Good afternoon," she greeted everyone with a professional smile. "I'm Jen Davis from Child Protective Services." The twins instinctively drew closer to one another, a movement that did not go unnoticed by Jen. Years of experience had taught her to read the body language of traumatized children. "Mr. Huntington, could we speak in private?" Jen asked, already moving to a more secluded corner of the room. Richard followed her, though his eyes stayed on the twins. "There's something very strange going on here. Miss Davis," he began, his voice low and urgent. "That ring the girl is wearing? It belonged to my late wife." Jen raised an eyebrow, her professional interest instantly piqued. "How would it have gotten to them?" "That's what I need to find out." Richard ran his hand through his hair, a frustrated gesture that disrupted his otherwise immaculate style. "They mention a kind lady who gave them the ring, but my wife died 5 years ago." Jen made several notes on her tablet, her mind already forming theories and an investigation plan. "Which orphanage did they mention?" "Sunshine," Richard replied, watching Madison whisper something to Harper that made the latter smile. "But there's more. Look at them, Miss Davis. Really look at them." Jen followed his gaze, studying the twins more carefully. Their wavy brown hair, their expressive eyes, the way their smiles lit up their faces. There was something there, a resemblance that went beyond the normal similarity between identical twins. "I'll need to investigate their background," Jen finally said. "Check Sunshine's records, find out how they got there, who dropped them off. How long will that take?" Richard interrupted, a note of urgency in his voice that surprised even himself. "A few days, at least." In the meantime, Jen hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Would you like to be considered as a temporary placement for them?" The question caught Richard by surprise, though it might have been exactly what he wanted to hear. His gaze shifted back to the twins, who were now idly playing with the fringes of the Persian rug. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Yes, I would," Jen nodded, making more notes. "I'll need to conduct a full home assessment, run a background check, do interviews, do whatever it takes," Richard interrupted again. "But they need to stay here, at least until we," his voice faltered slightly, "until we understand what's happening." Across the room, Harper was touching the ring again, the late afternoon sun making the blue stone glow like a fallen star. Richard couldn't help thinking of Elizabeth, of their last day together, of all the questions that went unanswered after her death, the kind lady the twins described. Could it be? No, it was impossible. Then how to explain the ring, how to explain the uncanny resemblance between the girls, and "I'll begin the investigation immediately," Jen announced, breaking his train of thought. "But Mr. Huntington," she hesitated for a moment, "prepare yourself for anything. Sometimes the truth can be more surprising than we imagine." Richard only nodded, his eyes still on the twins. The mystery of the ring was only the tip of the iceberg. He could feel it. There was so much more to come, so much more to be uncovered. As Jen left, making arrangements to start her investigation, Richard couldn't help but think that his life had changed completely in less than 24 hours. What had begun as a chance encounter on the street was turning into something much bigger, much deeper. Elizabeth's ring, which should have been lost forever, had somehow found its way back to him through those two little messengers. And now, watching the twins play innocently, Richard knew there was no turning back. He needed to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Night fell over the Huntington mansion, bringing with it more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. The mystery of the ring was just beginning to unfold. Jen Davis's office, typically an organized and serene space, looked like a hurricane had passed through. Files, documents, and photographs covered every available surface, creating a maze of information that defied coherent connection. No matter how she tried, the experienced social worker stared at her monitor with an expression that mixed frustration and fascination, her fingers drumming nervously on the desk. "It can't be," she muttered to herself, adjusting her black-framed glasses for the 10th time that morning. After a week of intensive investigation, the records for Madison and Harper looked more like a poorly written mystery novel than official documentation. The girls' birth certificates were incomplete, with crucial fields left blank in a way that defied standard procedure. The admission records at Sunshine Orphanage had date inconsistencies that would keep any auditor awake at night. Most intriguing, there was absolutely no information on their biological parents. Jen stood up, walking to the window of her 10th floor office. Outside, Los Angeles pulsed with its usual energy, unaware of the mystery she was trying to unravel. 15 years in social work had taught her that every child had a story, no matter how complicated. But these twins, it was as though they had simply materialized at the orphanage, across the city. In the imposing Huntington mansion, Richard was dealing with his own frustrations, seated in his Italian leather chair. He listened as Jake Callahan, LA's most sought-after and discreet private detective, presented his preliminary findings. The office, with its mahogany-paneled walls and shelves full of old books, felt too small to contain the tension in the air. "Elizabeth was not quite who everyone thought," Jake began, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of unexpected revelations. He slid a series of photographs across Richard's immaculate desk. In the last 2 years before the accident, she led a parallel life that few people knew about. Richard picked up the first photo with hands that tried not to tremble. It was Elizabeth, 5 years younger, leaving a community center in an underserved part of the city. Even in the slightly grainy picture, her smile was the same one he knew so well, the kind of smile that lit not only her face but the entire setting around her. She wore simple clothes, very different from the designer dresses she typically wore to social events. "I found records of substantial anonymous donations to various charities," Jake continued, watching his clients' reactions closely, all made in the months leading up to the accident. "We're talking about millions of dollars, Mr. Huntington." Richard frowned, his mind struggling to process the information. "How did I never know this? We shared everything." "Apparently not everything," Jake replied cautiously, removing more documents from his leather briefcase. "There are records of regular visits to 3 different fertility clinics between 2018 and 2019, all paid in cash, all under a false name." The revelation hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He and Elizabeth had tried to have children for years, facing disappointment after disappointment. The failed attempts had been a constant source of sadness, especially for Elizabeth. Or so he had thought. The sound of childish laughter echoed through the office walls, a musical reminder of the new reality he was living. Through the window, Richard could see the twins playing in the garden with Agnes. The housekeeper, normally so formal and reserved, was smiling openly as she helped the girls make flower crowns. "Mr. Huntington," Jake's voice brought him back to the present. "There's something else I need to show you." The detective pulled another envelope from his briefcase, this one marked with a red confidential seal. "We found records of a secret bank account in Elizabeth's name. The statements show a series of transfers to—" An eager knock on the door interrupted him. It was Madison, her brown eyes shining with that pure joy only children can radiate. Rick, come see what we found. Despite the tension of the moment, Richard couldn't help but smile. It was remarkable how in just 1 week these two little ones had managed to tear down all the emotional walls he had so carefully built. "I'll be right there, sweetie. I just need to finish an important conversation." Madison pouted adorably and walked into the office without ceremony. "But we found the flowers, the ones the kind lady said were your Liz's favorites." Richard felt the blood run cold in his veins. Beside him, Jake straightened up in his chair, suddenly more alert. "Which flowers, Madison?" "The blue peonies," the girl replied excitedly, spinning on her own axis like a tiny ballerina. "The kind lady said Liz loved them because they were rare, just like the ring. She said Liz spent hours caring for them in the secret garden." Richard exchanged a meaningful glance with Jake. Blue peonies were more than just rare flowers. They had been Elizabeth's obsession. She had developed a unique variety through years of careful cultivation, maintaining a special garden in the back of the mansion. It was a project very few people knew about, something she considered almost sacred. "Madison," Richard began, trying to keep his voice steady. "How do you know about the secret garden?" The girl stopped spinning, her small face assuming a serious expression that seemed out of place on someone so young. "The kind lady told us everything about you and Liz, about how you met in college when you spilled coffee on her dress." Jake began scribbling frantically in his notebook while Richard felt the world spin again. That clumsy meeting with Elizabeth at the university library was a story they rarely shared, almost a secret between them, something too precious for casual conversation. She also talked about the stars, Madison continued, oblivious to the impact of her words. "How Liz taught you to find Cassiopeia in the sky and why you had a special ring made for her." The detective stopped writing abruptly, looking at Richard with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. That detail about the constellation had never been mentioned publicly. It was an intimate memory Richard treasured. The phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the tension like a knife. It was Jen, Mr. Huntington. The social worker's voice sounded urgent. "We need to talk immediately. I found something in the records at Sunshine that, well, you need to see it in person." 2 hours later, Richard's office had been transformed into a makeshift investigation hub. Jen Davis spread documents across the desk as she explained her findings, her usual professional demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. "The records show the twins were left at the orphanage exactly 4 years ago," she explained, pointing at dates in various documents. "But there are serious inconsistencies. The intake dates don't match the initial medical records. Crucial signatures are missing or deliberately altered." Richard and Jake watched attentively as Jen arranged the papers in a specific order. "And then there's this," she continued, taking out a document protected by a plastic sleeve. "The name of the person who dropped the girls off at the orphanage is crossed out, but it's partially legible under the right light." Richard leaned over the document, and his heart nearly stopped. Beneath the pen marks trying to obscure, it was a signature he would recognize anywhere. "My God," he whispered, his voice shaking. "That's Elizabeth's handwriting." Jake quickly took the document, examining it with trained eyes. "We'd need a professional handwriting analysis, but there's no doubt," Richard interrupted. "I'd recognize the way she made her ease anywhere. It was a unique trait of hers." Jen cleared her throat, clearly uneasy. "Mr. Huntington, as your assigned social worker, I need to express my concern about how quickly and intensely you're getting attached to the girls, given the mysterious circumstances." "They know things, Lisa?" Richard cut her off, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Intimate details only Liz could have known. As if summoned by his words, Harper burst into the office, followed closely by Madison and Agnes. Rick, come see." We arranged the photos the way Liz liked. The adults followed the girls into the living room, where a surprising scene awaited them. Dozens of photographs had been laid out on the Persian rug in a specific, familiar pattern, exactly how Elizabeth used to arrange them when organizing her family albums. "See," Harper pointed proudly to the center of the arrangement. "The kind lady said Liz always put pictures of you two in the middle, forming a heart, because it was the center of everything, Jen observed with wide eyes, while Jake continued scribbling in his already almost full notepad. Agnes, who had worked in the mansion for decades, had tears in her eyes. "It's exactly how Mrs. Huntington did it," the housekeeper confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. She would spend hours arranging photos like that, saying each image had a special place in the story. Richard sank heavily onto the sofa, watching the twins handle the photographs with the same care and affection Elizabeth had always shown. It was as if a piece of her was there, alive, through these two little girls who had appeared out of nowhere in his life. "They show extraordinary knowledge about your late wife," Jen commented softly, taking a seat beside him. "It's more than knowledge," Richard replied, his gaze fixed on the girls. "It's like they have a connection to her, as though what? As though Liz is somehow communicating through them," he finished, aware of how irrational that sounded. Jake, who had been quietly observing, cleared his throat. "Maybe she was," he said, pulling another document from his seemingly endless file. "I found this in the records of the last fertility clinic she visited. It's a medical file dated exactly 3 months before the accident." Richard took the document with shaking hands. As his eyes scanned the words, the color drained from his face. This changes everything," he murmured, looking at the twins with new eyes. Jen stepped closer, concerned by Richard's sudden pallor. "Mr. Huntington, are you all right?" But Richard seemed lost in his own thoughts, his eyes fixed on the girls, who were now softly humming a tune that made his heart clench. It was the same lullaby Elizabeth used to sing every night, a song she claimed to have learned from her own mother. The mystery was deepening by the minute. Each new discovery led to more questions than answers, as though they were only scratching the surface of something much larger and more complex. In the garden, visible through the mansion's large windows, the blue peonies swayed gently in the late afternoon breeze, their rare petals holding secrets yet to be revealed. And somewhere, perhaps not as far away as everyone thought, the mysteries of the past were waiting to unfold. Richard looked again at the medical file in his hands, then at the twins, playing innocently with the photographs. Elizabeth had left behind far more than just memories. She had left a legacy of mysteries that was only beginning to unravel. The golden light of sunset spilled through the dusty windows of the Huntington mansion's attic, turning specks of dust into tiny floating diamonds, dancing in the still air. Jake Callahan, known for his methodical precision in investigations, was kneeling before an old Victorian dresser, his skilled hands examining each drawer with the care of an archaeologist unearthing precious relics. The attic, a space rarely visited since Elizabeth's death, held memories in every corner. Old trunks, furniture draped in white sheets, and stacked boxes cast elongated shadows across the wooden floor. The air carried a faint scent of lavender, Elizabeth's favorite, that somehow lingered after all these years. "Mr. Huntington," Jake called out, his voice breaking the near-reverential silence of the place. "I think I found something you need to see." Richard, who had been rummaging through a stack of boxes on the other side of the room, quickly came over. The detective was holding a carved wooden box decorated with delicate floral motifs. Peonies, Richard noted, with a pang in his heart. He had gifted it to Elizabeth on their first wedding anniversary. A unique piece made by a Japanese artisan she had admired during their honeymoon in Kyoto. "She kept her journals in here," Richard murmured, his fingers automatically tracing the familiar carvings. The lock yielded to a small gold key he still carried on his keychain, an object Elizabeth had insisted he keep just in case. Now he wondered if she had foreseen even this. Inside the box, organized chronologically with the meticulousness that was Elizabeth's hallmark, were her journals from the last few years. Each one was different. Some bound in soft leather, others simple spiral notebooks decorated with colorful stickers. Elizabeth always said that every phase of life deserved its own style of record. Richard picked up the most recent one with trembling hands. It was a volume bound in sky-blue leather, the color she loved so much. "There's something else in here," Jake continued, pulling out a thick folder from inside the dresser. His investigative instincts told him they were about to discover something significant. It's complete documentation on a program called New Beginnings. Looks like it's an initiative to help homeless children in the city. Richard opened the journal, and Elizabeth's elegant handwriting filled his vision. As familiar as his own reflection, the words seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. March 15, 2019. Today I met two small souls who changed everything, Madison and Harper. Even their names sound predestined. They remind me so much of myself as a child, before my aunt took me in. The same scared but hopeful eyes, the same quiet strength. The New Beginnings program isn't enough. They need a real home. I have to do something more permanent. My God, Richard whispered, his hands trembling so badly that Jake gently took the journal to continue reading. March 20th, 2019. Ben says the process will be complicated, but not impossible. I need to be careful. Rick wouldn't understand right now. He's still so hurt by our failed attempts, but I know deep in my heart these girls are the answer to our prayers. I just need to prepare the way. Downstairs in the mansion's cozy library, Jen Davis was conducting her own investigation. The social worker sat in a leather armchair, carefully watching Madison and Harper build a tower of blocks on the Persian rug. The girls answered her questions with a disconcerting mix of childlike innocence and ancient wisdom that continued to intrigue Jen. The kind lady always came after everyone fell asleep, Madison explained. Focused on balancing a red block at the top of her tower, she brought different books every time. And chocolates, Harper added, her eyes lighting up at the memory, the little ones wrapped in gold paper. Jen made another note on her tablet. Belgian truffles, she asked casually, recalling Elizabeth's file mentioning her fondness for imported chocolates. That's it, the twins answered in unison. She said they were special because they were the same ones served at our wedding. A voice finished from the door. It was Richard, still holding Elizabeth's journal, his face etched with barely contained emotion. Jake followed him, carrying the folder of documents from the New Beginnings program. Mr. Huntington, the records show your wife was involved in something far more elaborate than mere temporary assistance to homeless kids. She wanted to adopt us, Madison said, with the straightforwardness only children can manage. The kind lady said, we'd have a real family, with a garden full of blue flowers and a big house with windows that reached the ceiling. A dense silence followed. Jen alternated her gaze between Richard and the girls, her professional mind racing to process the implications of that offhand revelation, Mr. Huntington. She began cautiously. This adds a significant layer of complexity to the legal situation. If your wife was indeed initiating an adoption process before the accident, we need to understand exactly what steps she had taken. Richard nodded absently, his eyes fixed on the twins, who continued their colorful construction as if they hadn't just turned his world upside down again. Ben, he murmured more to himself than to the others. We need to call Ben immediately. Jake already had his phone out. Benjamin Harrison, your family attorney? Yes, he wasn't just our lawyer, he was also a close friend of Elizabeth's. If she was doing anything legal, he'd be the only person she trusted to help. Jen frowned, her professional concern mounting by the minute. As the assigned social worker, she had to consider not just the girls' immediate welfare, but also Richard's emotional stability, and the legality of it all. Mr. J. Huntington, she began, choosing her words carefully. I need to express my concern about how you're processing all these revelations, the news about your late wife, combined with the emotional stress of the last few days. I'm perfectly fine, Richard interrupted, though his voice betrayed a slight tremor. And for the first time in 5 years, I'm beginning to see a pattern, to understand what Liz was trying to do. Jake had stepped aside to make the call, but now returned with an update. Ben is on his way. He said he has something important we need to see. Something Liz left with him. The next few hours turned the library into a temporary command center. Agnes, sensing the gravity of the situation, brought in a tray with tea, coffee, and homemade cookies, the same one Elizabeth adored and that the twins, coincidentally or not, had also come to love. More pages from the diaries emerged and were examined, each entry revealing a new facet of Elizabeth's meticulously crafted plans. April 12, 2019. The process will be complicated, but Ben assured me it's possible. The girls need legal protection first. There are delicate issues about their origins that need sorting out. The New Beginnings program will serve as an initial cover while we work out the details. Rick will understand when the time is right. He always does, even if he doesn't agree at first. April 28, 2019. Today, the twins asked me about the stars. We sat in the garden of the community center, and I told them about Cassiopeia, about that magical night on the observatory rooftop with Rick. Their little eyes lit up so much when I explained why I chose that constellation for the ring. It's like they were already part of our story, just waiting for the right moment to appear. Liz was weaving a web, Jake observed quietly, watching Richard absorb each word of the diaries. She was creating a connection between you and the girls long before the accident, Richard finished, his voice thick with emotion. She knew I'd need that bond. Liz was always thinking several steps ahead. Jen, who had been furiously taking notes on her tablet, cleared her throat for attention. Mr. Huntington, I must advise you about potential legal complications here, an interrupted adoption attempt, possibly altered records, ethical concerns about the New Beginnings program. One thing at a time, a new voice interrupted from the door. Benjamin Harrison, imposing in his perfectly tailored navy suit, stepped into the library carrying a thick folder and a small metal box. And I believe I have some of the answers we're looking for. The twins, until then, absorbed in their block tower, looked up simultaneously at the sound of the new voice, their eyes widened in instant recognition. "You're the man from the wedding photo," Madison exclaimed excitedly. "The kind lady showed us? You were dancing with her after they cut the chocolate strawberry cake." Ben froze in mid-step, his professional facade visibly faltering. How could they possibly know? "It's a long story," Richard said, a small smile forming on his lips for the first time that day. "A very long story, and it's about to get even longer," Ben replied, regaining his composure and placing the folder and metal box on the table. "Liz left specific instructions with me. She said I'd know the right time to reveal them." The lawyer opened the folder, revealing a series of meticulously organized documents. Liz officially began the adoption process in May 2019, he explained. Removing a stack of papers, she was using New Beginnings as a legal way to establish initial contact with the girls while she resolved certain issues about their origins. Jen leaned in to examine the documents, her expression equal parts professional admiration and concern. "This is remarkably well planned," she thought, through every legal angle possible. "Liz was always meticulous," Ben said, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "But there was something else, something she made me promise only to reveal if the circumstances were exactly right." He picked up the small metal box, his fingers hesitating over the lock. "Rick, do you remember the conversation we had at the hospital right after the accident?" Richard frowned, trying to recall those hazy days of pain and confusion. "Vaguely. You said Liz had left something with you, but it wasn't the right time." "Exactly." Ben nodded, finally opening the box. Liz knew there were risks in her plan. She left this as a sort of, well, she called it a plan B. As the sun set outside, painting the sky in dramatic shades of pink and gold, the group gathered closer to see what was inside the box. In the garden, visible through the library's large windows, Elizabeth's beloved blue peonies swayed gently in the evening breeze, as if they too were eager to reveal their secrets. And somewhere, perhaps not as far away as everyone believed, the spirit of Elizabeth Huntington watched as her web of plans and coincidences finally began to unfold, knowing her little messengers had at last found their way home. Madison and Harper, now seated closer to Richard, looked at the box with childlike curiosity. The ring around Harper's neck glinted momentarily as a final ray of sunlight hit it, as though Elizabeth were winking at them, knowing the greatest of her secrets was about to be unveiled. The law offices of Harrison and Associates took up the entire 30th floor of a downtown skyscraper, its modern windows offering a spectacular view of the sprawling city. In the main conference room, whose sleek glass walls had witnessed decades of legal battles, a tense group pored over the mountain of documents spread across the polished mahogany table. "We need to prepare for war," Benjamin Harrison declared, his gold-rimmed glasses reflecting the morning light as he methodically sorted the papers before him. Sunshine Orphanage isn't just questioning the validity of the documents we found, they're trying to discredit Liz's involvement with the girls entirely. Richard Huntington, seated at the head of the table in his immaculate Italian suit, bore dark circles under his eyes that not even his billionaire status could conceal. The last few weeks since discovering Elizabeth's diaries had been an emotional roller coaster, leaving him physically and mentally drained. "How can they question the evidence?" Richard demanded, his voice revealing a mix of indignation and exhaustion. "We have the New Beginnings records, the diaries, the witnesses, and we have the ring," Jen Davis added emphatically from her seat on the opposite side of the table. The social worker, who had initially shown so much skepticism, had become one of the most ardent defenders of the cause after witnessing the extraordinary transformation in both Richard and the twins, a one-of-a-kind piece of jewelry. Custom-made with the Cassiopeia constellation in diamonds, the story behind it is irrefutable. Ben took off his glasses, wiping them methodically with a silk handkerchief, a habit Richard knew signaled bad news. "The problem is more complex than it seems," the orphanage director, Mrs. Blackwood, not only claims there are no official records of Liz's visits, but is also insinuating something much darker. "What kind of insinuation?" Richard asked, his body taut as a violin string. "She's suggesting the girls might have obtained the ring by alternative means, implying there might have been theft, that this whole story was fabricated after the fact." Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the expensive wood floor. "That's absurd. They're 4-year-old children, for heaven's sake." "Sit down, Rick," Ben ordered, with the authority of a decades-long friendship. "This is exactly the kind of emotional reaction they plan to use against you in court. They're already questioning your ability to be a single father, especially considering your history." "My history. 70-hour work weeks. 3 broken engagements in the last 5 years, a tendency to solve problems by throwing money at them?" Ben consulted his notes. "Mrs. Blackwood is painting a portrait of you as an emotionally unavailable man who was trying to buy the love of 2 vulnerable children. While the legal battle played out in the office, the Huntington mansion pulsed with a different energy. Agnes, who had served the family for over 2 decades, watched Madison and Harper through the kitchen window. The girls had developed a morning ritual that never failed to touch the housekeeper's heart. Every morning before breakfast was even served, they visited Elizabeth's garden, not the main one, but the small private sanctuary she had created behind the mansion's walls, dominated by her beloved blue peonies. "Good morning, flowers," Harper greeted cheerily, her tiny finger gently outlining the edge of a sky-blue petal. "Do you think she's happy, the kind lady?" Madison asked, carefully propping up a flower that drooped too low. "She said she would be. Remember," she promised. Agnes discreetly wiped away a tear. After so long serving the Huntington family, she had developed a sixth sense for important truths. And those girls, there was something about them that transcended coincidences or rational explanations. Back at Ben's office, Jake Callahan presented his latest findings. The detective, famous for his near-obsessive thoroughness, had spent the past few weeks following every possible lead regarding Elizabeth's secret activities. "I found 3 more staff members at the community center who confirm Liz's regular presence," he reported, distributing carefully documented statements. But the real treasure came from one of the volunteers, Maria Gonzalez. She kept a detailed photo journal of the activities. Jake slid a series of photographs across the table. In each one, Elizabeth appeared interacting with various groups of children, but her eyes inevitably found 2 identical little figures who smiled shyly at the camera. "The dates are crucial," Jen pointed out, leaning in for a better look. "These were taken regularly during the 3 months leading up to the accident. They show a consistent pattern of involvement." "Maria remembers Liz vividly," Jake continued. "She said Liz was obsessively focused on the twins, always making sure they had extra attention, special food, new books." And here's the interesting part. Maria specifically recalls Liz mentioning adoption plans. Richard picked up one of the photographs with trembling hands. Elizabeth looked radiant, her smile more genuine and luminous than he remembered during the last years of their marriage. How had he not realized something so significant was happening right under his nose? "There's more," Jake said, taking a small notebook from his briefcase. Maria kept a personal diary. "Let me read a passage. Liz spent the whole afternoon with the twins today. The way she looks at them, it's as if she's seeing something no one else can. She confided in me that she believes meeting them was no coincidence. She said some souls are meant to find each other, no matter the obstacles." The silence that followed was broken by Ben, who cleared his throat for everyone's attention. "Rick, we need to discuss your schedule. Judge Peterson is known for focusing on real parental commitment. He'll want to see tangible changes in your lifestyle." "I've already taken care of that," Richard interrupted, pulling a document from his own folder. "I transferred 80% of my operational responsibilities at the company to the executive board. Caroline is restructuring my calendar, so I'm home every night before dinner. And this," he slid the paper to Ben, "is the blueprint for the new children's wing I'm adding to the mansion. Each girl will have her own room, but they'll be connected by a shared playroom because they don't like being separated." Jen made several positive notes in her report. This was exactly the kind of prioritizing and detailed thinking she needed to document. "There's one more thing," Ben said after examining the documents. "I saved it for last because it's extraordinary." He pulled a brown envelope from his folder, his usually impassive face betraying rare emotion. "Liz left this with me, with specific instructions to open it only if a situation like this arose." The envelope contained a multi-page letter written in Elizabeth's elegant handwriting on the high-quality stationery she always preferred. "My beloved Rick, if you're reading this, it means something happened to me before I could complete my plans. But it also means that in some way, Madison and Harper found their way to you. I always knew they would. Some stories are written in the stars long before we start to read them. I know you must be confused, maybe even angry at me for keeping secrets. But meeting those girls, Rick, it was like finding a piece of my soul I didn't know was missing. They're special in ways you'll soon understand, if you don't already. The ring I gave Harper, yes, I gave it to her personally, is more than just jewelry. It's a promise that love finds its way even when fate seems to have other plans. When I look at them, I see the same sparkle I saw in you that night at the observatory when you showed me that some constellations are meant to shine together. Our years trying to have children were difficult. I know, each failed attempt, each crushed hope. But now I realize the universe had other plans. Madison and Harper aren't just two kids in need of a home, they're our daughters. Rick, I knew it the moment I saw them, and I know you'll see it too. When the time is right, I started the legal process discreetly. With Ben's help, the New Beginnings program was just the first step. There are documents and records all prepared, but more important than any official paperwork is the bond that already exists. A bond that goes beyond bureaucracy. If anything happens to me, promise you'll find them. Promise you'll give them the home they've always deserved. I know it might seem scary. Parenthood always scared you a little, didn't it? But you'll be a wonderful father, Rick. You have so much love to give. Even though you try to hide it behind those walls you've built, the girls will help you tear down those walls, the same way they help me. They have a gift for seeing through the masks we wear, for touching the hearts we protect. Madison has your determination. You know that. And Harper, she has that shy smile of yours, the one you only show in special moments. The ring will guide them to you when the time is right. Cassiopeia has always been our constellation, hasn't it? The queen who defied the gods for love. Sometimes I think I'm also defying something bigger by trying to rearrange fate this way. But some battles must be fought. Some destinies must be rewritten. Take care of them for me, my love, and let them take care of you too. Love manifests in many forms. And sometimes families are formed not by blood, but by the stars that guide us to one another. With all my love, Liz, P.S. Don't let red tape or fear stop you. You're stronger than you think, and they'll need that strength. And Rick, the blue peonies, they'll love helping you care for them. Teach them what those flowers mean to us. The letter went on with practical details, contact names, numbers of secret bank accounts set aside for the girls, specific instructions about legal procedures. but it was the personal side that left everyone in the room silent and moved. "This changes everything," Jen whispered, making no attempt to hide the tears running down her cheeks. A letter like this, left with the family lawyer, detailing not just her involvement with the girls, but also clear intentions of adoption. "Judge Peterson needs to see this," Ben agreed, already making notes. "But we have to brace for backlash. The orphanage won't give up easily, especially considering the implications." Just then, Richard's phone rang. It was Agnes, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mr. Huntington," she said, "you need to see this. The girls found Mrs. Huntington's old scrapbook, the one she kept of your travels. They're filling in the photo captions with details no one but Mrs. Huntington could know." Richard put the call on speaker, letting everyone listen as the housekeeper described the extraordinary scene unfolding in the mansion's library. "They know about the storm in Venice?" Agnes continued, her voice filled with awe. "How you and Mrs. Huntington took shelter in that little church, how the priest served you hot wine while you waited for the rain to pass. They know about the cat you fed, about the music that was playing. No one but Liz and I knew those details," Richard murmured, his face pale. "We never told anyone." Jen was frantically taking notes on her tablet, her professional veneer replaced by something closer to wonder. As an experienced social worker, she had seen hundreds of adoption cases. But this was different. It was as though Elizabeth had orchestrated every detail, every coincidence, every connection. "Mr. Huntington," she finally said, "as your assigned social worker, I have a duty to remain objective, but I also have a duty to recognize when something extraordinary is happening. The connection between you and the girls, how seamlessly they've integrated into your home, the details they know. It's as if Liz planned every move," Jake added softly, "every detail, every revelation." Ben began organizing the documents into strategic piles, his lawyerly mode taking over. "We'll need detailed statements from everyone, Agnes, Maria Gonzalez, the community center staff. We'll build a case showing not just Liz's involvement, but also how the girls are thriving under your care." Richard barely heard him. His thoughts were on the twins, how they had transformed the once silent mansion into a real home in such a short time, how their laughter echoed through the halls the same way Elizabeth's had, how for the first time in 5 years he felt truly alive. "Liz knew," he said at last, his voice thick with emotion. "She knew I'd need them just as much as they'd need me." Jen watched as Richard stood, determination etched into every line of his face. This was no longer the workaholic billionaire she had met weeks ago. This was a man transformed by love, the kind of transformation social workers dream of witnessing. "Ben," Richard called, his voice resolute. "Use every resource necessary. Hire the best experts. Don't worry about the cost. Those girls are my daughters." Liz ensured that long before any of us realized it. "There's one more thing you should know," Jake interrupted, removing one last document from his folder. "We found records of a bank account Liz maintained in the girls' names. She made regular deposits, building a fund for their future, and the most interesting part," Ben added, looking over the papers, "is that the deposits started on the exact day she met them, as if she knew from the very first moment that they were special," Richard completed, "that they were meant to be ours." At the Huntington mansion, oblivious to the looming legal battles, Madison and Harper continued cataloging Elizabeth's scrapbook, whispering stories they shouldn't know, sharing memories that seemed to come from somewhere beyond time and space. And in the garden, Elizabeth's blue peonies danced gently in the afternoon breeze, holding secrets that only time would reveal. The ring on Harper's neck shimmered in the sunlight, a silent promise that some stories are written in the stars long before they begin to be told. The legal battle was only beginning, but Richard knew in his heart Elizabeth had paved the way. She had always been like that, planning several steps ahead, weaving a web of love and protection that would endure even her passing. "Let's go home," he finally said, carefully putting away Elizabeth's letter. The girls must be waiting for dinner, and for the first time in many years, the word home meant far more than just an empty mansion. It meant family, it meant love, it meant a new beginning that Elizabeth had so carefully orchestrated from beyond the stars. The tension in Benjamin Harrison's conference room was palpable as Eleanor Vanderbilt walked in, her aristocratic presence immediately dominating the space, a second cousin of Elizabeth's whom no one had seen in over a decade. Eleanor seemed to have emerged from the past with the precision of a guided missile. "That ring belongs to the Vanderbilt family," she declared without preamble, her blue eyes, so different from Elizabeth's, fixed on Richard. "It's a family heirloom that should have been returned after Liz's death." Richard felt his stomach churn. In all the worries about the adoption, he had never considered the possibility that someone from Elizabeth's family might show up to complicate things further. "The ring was a gift from me to Liz," he answered, keeping his voice level. "It was specially designed for her, with the Cassiopeia constellation, using diamonds from the Vanderbilt collection," Eleanor interrupted. "Stones that belonged to our grandmother. Liz had no right to dispose of them that way, let alone give them to street children." The way she spat out the last words made Richard's blood boil before he could respond. Ben interjected diplomatically. "Mrs. Vanderbilt, we have extensive documentation proving Liz left specific instructions about the ring and the girls, instructions that conveniently benefit a lonely widower trying to buy himself a ready-made family." Eleanor arched a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Forgive me if I sound skeptical." Back at the mansion, oblivious to this new threat, Harper played idly with the ring, while Madison arranged her dolls for an imaginary tea party. Agnes watched them with maternal concern. They seemed to sense something was wrong. "Will Rick be home soon?" Harper asked for the third time that morning. "Of course, dear. He just had an important meeting." "With the mean lady," Madison murmured, startling the housekeeper. "The kind lady warned us about her." Agnes froze. "Which mean lady?" "Madison, the one who didn't like Liz," Harper replied in her sister's place. "The kind lady said she would try to ruin everything. But we shouldn't be afraid." In Ben's office, the argument raged on. Eleanor had brought her own lawyer, a hawkish man named Preston, who flipped through documents with predatory efficiency. "My client has serious concerns about Mr. Huntington's motives," Preston declared. "A man who barely had time for his wife when she was alive now suddenly wants to adopt 2 children. Richard felt the blow like a knife to the heart. It was true, he had been an obsessive workaholic during his marriage. How many times had Elizabeth eaten dinner alone? How many events had he missed for urgent meetings? "People change," Jen Davis intervened, surprising everyone with the firmness in her voice. "In my 2 decades as a social worker, I've rarely seen a transformation as genuine as Mr. Huntington's. A convenient transformation," Eleanor said acidly, "especially considering the fortune Liz set aside in trust for her future children." The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. Richard turned to Ben, confused. "Liz set up a trust?" "Yes," Ben confirmed. "But it wasn't public knowledge. She established it around the same time she started New Beginnings. So that's it." Eleanor let out a humorless laugh. "The billionaire found out he can grow his fortune by adopting the kids my cousin foolishly chose." "Enough!" Richard's voice thundered through the room. "I don't care about any money. Those girls are my daughters. Liz knew it. It was always clear to her. Why do you think she gave Harper the ring? Why do you think they know things only Liz could know?" "Stories can be taught," Preston said coldly. "Children are impressionable. Cassiopeia's ring isn't just a piece of jewelry," Richard continued, ignoring the lawyer. "It's a symbol of our love, of our story. Liz chose it as a messenger for a reason." Meanwhile, at the mansion, something extraordinary was happening. The twins had taken their dolls to Elizabeth's blue peony garden, something they'd never done before. "The kind lady said it's safe here," Madison explained to Agnes, who watched them curiously. "She said the flowers would protect us." Harper clutched the ring, which shone oddly under the sunlight, filtered through the blue petals. "She said that when the mean lady came, we needed to stay close to the flowers because this is where she told Liz about us." Agnes felt a chill run down her spine. "What else did the kind lady tell you?" "That Rick would be sad and afraid," Madison answered, adjusting her favorite doll, "but that we shouldn't let him give up." Back in the office, the meeting finally drew to a close. Eleanor and her lawyer left, issuing veiled threats of legal challenges and promises of public exposure. "Rick," Ben called gently once they were alone, "I need to ask, why are you really doing this? Is it for Liz, for the girls, for yourself?" Richard was silent for a long moment, gazing out the window at the city sprawling endlessly before him. At last he answered, "At first, maybe it was for Liz, a way to honor her final wishes, to keep her memory alive. But now," he smiled softly, "now it's because I can't imagine my life without those girls. They're not just a piece of Liz, they're my daughters, and I'll fight for them with everything I have." When Richard arrived home that night, he found Madison and Harper asleep in the peony garden, their dolls arranged in a perfect circle around them. The ring on Harper's neck glowed under the last rays of the sun, like an earthly star guarding the girl's slumber. Agnes approached quietly. "They waited for you all day here, said they had to protect the flowers." Richard sat down next to the sleeping twins, his heart overflowing with love. Eleanor could question his motives. The world could doubt the ring's story. But in that moment, he knew with absolute certainty, some families are formed by destiny, not by blood. And somewhere, perhaps not as far away as everyone assumed, Elizabeth smiled, knowing her plan, though beset by obstacles, continued its inevitable path toward the ending she had always known was right. The Los Angeles Superior Court exuded an air of gravity on that Thursday morning. The Huntington case had attracted so much attention that the courtroom was packed with journalists and spectators, filling every inch of the polished wooden benches. Richard Huntington straightened his navy blue tie, Elizabeth's favorite, as he waited for the session to begin. The twins sat in the front row with Agnes, their little hands clasped together in mutual support that made Richard's heart ache. Harper fiddled with the ring on her neck, as she always did when she was nervous. "All rise," the bailiff announced, Judge Harold Peterson presiding. Silence fell as the judge took his seat. Peterson was known for his impartiality and insight, but also for his ability to see beyond appearances in complex family cases. "Case number 2025-47B, he announced, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "Huntington versus State of California, petition for adoption." Benjamin Harrison stood impeccable in his gray suit. "Your Honor, I would like to begin by presenting documentary evidence of the late Elizabeth Huntington's involvement with Madison and Harper, including—" "Excuse me, Your Honor?" A familiar voice cut in from the back of the courtroom, making Richard freeze in his seat. Charles Manning, requesting permission to present relevant evidence in this case. The immediate murmur that followed was deafening. Charles Manning, CEO of Manning Innovations and Richard Huntington's declared rival, walked confidently down the center aisle with the poise of a predator. His Italian suit and calculated smile were his trademarks, as was his knack for appearing at the most devastating moments possible. "Your Honor," Ben protested, "Mr. Manning has no connection to this case." "On the contrary," Charles smoothly interrupted, "I have crucial information regarding Mr. Huntington's true motives in this adoption." Judge Peterson eyed the scene over his reading glasses. "Proceed, Mr. Manning, but be warned, this court has no tolerance for corporate games." Charles nodded to his assistant, who began distributing folders to those present. Over the past few months, the Huntington Group has faced serious shareholder scrutiny. Its market leadership is threatened, its public image tarnished by accusations of unethical practices. Richard felt his blood boiling, but Ben placed a hand on his arm, silently advising patience. Then, as if by a miracle, Charles continued. Richard Huntington suddenly becomes the father of the year. 2 adorable orphans, a heartwarming story about his late wife, a mysterious ring, everything perfectly orchestrated for a PR campaign. "This is ridiculous." Richard couldn't contain himself. "How dare you order?" Judge Peterson slammed his gavel. "Mr. Huntington, control yourself." In the front row, Madison and Harper squeezed each other's hands tighter. Agnes tried to comfort them, but it was clear the tension in the room was upsetting the girls. "I have here," Charles went on, pulling more documents from his folder, "evidence of meetings between the Huntington Group's marketing team and several PR agencies. The theme, humanizing the brand through family narratives." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Richard felt as though the floor was vanishing beneath him. It was true, his marketing team had suggested campaigns focusing on family values, but it had nothing to do with the twins. "Your Honor," Ben intervened, "these allegations are wholly irrelevant to the case at hand, Mr. Manning is clearly using this court for his own business ends." On the contrary, Charles smirked, the same smug grin Richard knew too well from corporate clashes. "I'm merely trying to protect two vulnerable children from being used as pawns in a corporate game." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Harper, who had been silent until then, suddenly stood up. "You're the bad man," she declared, with a clarity and conviction only a child can have. "The kind lady warned us about you." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles Manning, for perhaps the first time in his life, seemed momentarily at a loss. "The kind lady said you were going to try to hurt Rick," Madison added, also standing up. "Because you always wanted what was his, girls," Judge Peterson said gently. "Can you tell me who this kind lady is?" The twins exchanged that special look they always did before Harper answered. "She's the one who gave me the ring," she said. "Mr. Manning was afraid because Rick was going to find out something really bad about him." Charles visibly paled. "This is absurd. They are just children repeating stories that—" "Your Honor," Jake Callahan, the detective, rose from the back of the courtroom. "I request permission to present newly discovered evidence." The judge nodded, and Jake approached with a thick file. "During our investigation of Elizabeth Huntington's involvement in the New Beginnings program, we found something interesting. The program was looking into the misappropriation of charity funds that led directly to a Manning Innovation subsidiary." Charles's face drained of color. Richard felt the puzzle pieces falling into place. The timing of Elizabeth's death, Charles's sudden interest in the twins. Liz found out, didn't she? Richard stood slowly. "She uncovered something in her work with the program, something that could destroy you." "Your Honor," Charles's lawyer tried to intervene, but Judge Peterson silenced him with a gesture. "Mr. Callahan," the judge said, "please continue." Jake opened the file. Elizabeth Huntington kept a detailed diary of her findings. "We found a digital copy on a secure server, programmed for release only under specific circumstances." The courtroom was in absolute silence as Jake displayed documents on a large screen, spreadsheets, emails, and bank records pointing to an elaborate fraud scheme involving funds meant for underprivileged children. "Liz was preparing a comprehensive dossier," Jake explained. "She planned to expose everything. But she died in a convenient accident," Richard said, his voice trembling with contained rage. Chaos erupted in the courtroom. Charles Manning tried to head for the exit, only to find two federal agents blocking his way. Apparently, Jake wasn't the only one investigating the case. "Order!" Judge Peterson thundered, pounding his gavel repeatedly. When silence finally returned, he addressed Richard directly. "Mr. Huntington, I believe now would be a good time for you to tell us, in your own words, why you want to adopt these girls." Richard looked at Madison and Harper, who had returned to their seats but kept their eyes on him with unwavering trust. The ring on Harper's neck caught the light streaming through the high courtroom windows, casting tiny rainbows on the walls. "Your Honor," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "when Liz died, I thought I'd never be able to love like that again. I buried myself in work, building walls around me. I built an empire that earned me a reputation as a cold, calculating CEO. He paused, discreetly wiping a tear. They asked me to be their dad for 24 hours, just one day. But that very first dinner together, when they laughed at a silly joke I told, the same joke that always made Liz roll her eyes and smile, I knew my life had changed forever. The courtroom was silent, every person riveted by the moment. I'm not trying to replace Liz or use the girls for any purpose. I'm just trying to honor the last and greatest gift my wife gave me, the chance to be a father, the chance to love again. The twins had stood once more and ran to hug him, not caring about courtroom protocol. Richard wrapped them in his arms, and for a moment, the world outside that embrace ceased to exist. Judge Peterson observed the scene for a long moment before speaking. Given the extraordinary events of this morning, I'm calling a recess to review the new evidence, but, he added, looking directly at the small family locked in a tight embrace, It seems quite clear to me where these girls belong. As federal agents led a visibly shaken Charles Manning out of the courtroom, Richard continued holding his daughters. Elizabeth's ring gleamed between them, no longer just a symbol of lost love, but a promise of love found. And somewhere, Elizabeth smiled. Her plan had worked perfectly, not just to unite her family, but to ensure the truth finally came to light. The blue peonies in the Huntington Mansion's garden would bloom especially beautifully that spring, as if celebrating the victory of love over greed, truth over lies, and family over loneliness. The morning that would seal the fate of the Huntington family dawned with an extraordinary clarity, as though the sky itself wished to witness the events about to unfold. The Los Angeles sun, usually timid at that time of year, poured over the city in golden cascades, making the peonies in the mansion's garden sparkle like living jewels. Richard Huntington woke before his alarm, his body tense with anticipation for the day that would change everything. The gentle sound of children's voices led him to the garden, where he found Madison and Harper already in their morning routine, as if they had an intuitive sense of the day's importance. The twins were quietly chatting with Elizabeth's flowers, a habit that still surprised and moved him. They wore matching blue dresses that Agnes had chosen especially for the occasion, the exact shade of the peonies surrounding them. "The flowers look different today," Harper said when she noticed Richard's approach, her small finger tracing a sky-blue petal. The ring at her neck caught a ray of sunlight, creating a dance of light over the blossoms. "The kind lady said today is the day all truths come to light." Madison nodded solemnly, adjusting a drooping flower. She said even the truths you didn't know existed, Rick before he could fully process the enigmatic meaning of their words. Benjamin Harrison arrived in the garden, carrying a folder so thick it made Richard's stomach clench. The past week since Charles Manning's shocking courtroom downfall had been a whirlwind of revelations and surprises. "Rick," Ben called, his face, usually so serious, lit by something that looked very much like triumph. "You need to see this right away." Sensing the moment's importance, Agnes quickly arranged an impromptu breakfast in the garden while she set the table with the efficiency of decades of service. Ben began spreading documents out over the white linen cloth. Jake worked night and day in the Huntington Group's archives, he explained, organizing the papers. "What we found, well, it's extraordinary." The documents revealed a truth even Richard hadn't fully known. Over the past 5 years, those years everyone viewed as his coldest, most business-driven, the Huntington Group had secretly become one of the biggest contributors to social programs on the West Coast. "Look here," Ben pointed to a series of financial reports. "While everyone thought you were just raking in profits, 30% of the company's revenue was directed to social programs. Free clinics in impoverished neighborhoods, scholarships, community centers for homeless children." "But how?" Richard took the documents with shaking hands. "I signed the financial reports. How did I not notice? Because Liz planned it that way." Came a new voice. Caroline, his assistant of over a decade, approached with her own set of documents. She set up the system before the accident. The social programs were presented in the reports as strategic development projects. "You knew?" Richard asked, a blend of surprise and admiration in his voice. Caroline smiled softly. "Liz made me promise to continue presenting the projects this way. After she was gone, she said your heart would always choose to do the right thing, even when your mind was distracted by other matters." "Liz knew," Madison said quietly, moving closer to the table with Harper. "The kind lady told us that even when you pretended not to care, your heart never stopped helping others. Like the time you built an entire hospital just because one of your employees mentioned her child was sick," Harper added casually, causing the adults to freeze. How do you know about St. Clair Hospital?" Richard asked, astonished. The project had been kept strictly confidential, recorded only as infrastructure expansion in official documents. "The kind lady knows everything," the twins answered in unison, wearing that enigmatic smile so reminiscent of Elizabeth's. Before anyone could question further, Jen Davis arrived in a hurry, her tablet in hand and an almost breathless excitement in her eyes. "Mr. Huntington," she called, "the community. It's unbelievable. You need to see this." On social media, a massive wave of support had formed. It began with a post from Maria Gonzalez, the former community center volunteer, sharing how the New Beginnings program had rescued dozens of homeless children. Within hours, hundreds of testimonials poured in. Employees of the Huntington Group shared stories of scholarship programs that had changed their lives. Entire families spoke of how free clinics had saved their loved ones. Former participants in the social programs emerged to give emotional accounts. Here, Jen showed a particularly moving video. It's the daughter of that hospital employee at St. Clair. She's graduating from med school now. In the video, a young woman in a white coat spoke through tears. "No one knew, but it was Mr. Huntington who made sure I got the best treatments when I was sick, and now, 10 years later, I'm graduating to work at the same hospital he built. Some people call that coincidence. I call it fate." "Apparently," Jen smiled, "you weren't as good at hiding your heart as you thought. The courtroom was even more crowded than in the previous session." When the Huntington family arrived, the buzz of excited voices had replaced the tense silence of before. Where there had once been skepticism, there was now an almost festive atmosphere of anticipation. Charles Manning, handcuffed and escorted by federal agents, looked as though he had aged years since his last appearance. The investigations sparked by his accusations against Richard had turned against him, revealing not only the charity fund scam, but also a complex web of crimes stretching back decades. "All rise," the bailiff announced with a solemnity that seemed different from the usual, Judge Harold Peterson presiding. The judge took his seat, and everyone noticed he looked lighter, almost pleased, as he adjusted his glasses and examined the large pile of new documents before him. "Before we proceed," he began, his deep voice echoing through the courtroom, "I'd like to hear from the girls." Madison and Harper stood gracefully, their little hands intertwined as always. Their blue dresses made it seem as though a piece of Elizabeth's garden had been brought into the courtroom. "Girls," the judge began gently, "do you understand what's happening here today?" "Yes, Your Honor," Madison replied with surprising clarity for her age. "Today you're going to say if we can be officially what we already are in our hearts, a family. And what exactly do you think a family is?" Harper touched the ring at her neck before answering. "The kind lady taught us that a family is like the blue peonies in the garden. Each flower is unique and special by itself, but together they make something magical happen." "And Rick," the judge prompted, "how does he fit into this magic?" "Rick is like the sun," Madison explained simply. "He thinks all he knows how to do is shine, to make money and do business. But really, he makes everyone around him grow and bloom, even if he doesn't realize it." A murmur of approval rippled through the courtroom, and several people discreetly wiped away tears. "And you chose him." From the very first day, the twins answered together, even when he was sad and afraid, even when he tried to pretend he didn't need love. The judge nodded, clearly moved. "Mr. D. Huntington, I'd like to hear your final words." Richard rose slowly, his heart pounding in a rhythm that seemed synchronized with the ring sparkling on Harper's neck. He looked at his daughters. Yes, in his heart. They were already his daughters, and found the courage he needed. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion. "For years after Liz died, I existed but didn't live. I hid behind numbers, contracts, and meetings. I built an empire that got me labeled a cold-hearted mogul." He paused, a gentle smile softening his features. What no one knew, not even I truly realized, was that Liz had built her own empire within mine, an empire of compassion, of service, of love. Today I discovered that even at my coldest, part of me was still responding to the warmth she had planted in my heart. Richard glanced at the twins, who watched him with those eyes that seemed to hold all the world's wisdom. Then, on an ordinary morning, two little warriors decided to save my wallet and ended up saving my soul. They brought back not just memories of Liz, but something entirely new, hope through them. I found that I could still love, still laugh, still be a father. The courtroom was silent, absorbing every word. Liz knew she always knew that I'd need them as much as they'd need me. The ring she gave Harper isn't just a piece of jewelry or a family heirloom. It's a symbol that some stories are written in the stars long before we begin to understand them. He looked directly at the judge, his voice resolute with conviction. I'm not here asking permission to build a family. I'm here asking to make official the family we already are, a family Elizabeth, in her infinite wisdom, planned long before any of us realized how much we needed each other. Judge Peterson removed his glasses, wiping them methodically, a habit everyone in the court knew was his moment of deep reflection. In my 30 years on the bench, he finally began, I've learned that family isn't something defined by documents or DNA. It's something you feel, something you live, something you choose every day. He put his glasses back on, looking directly at Richard and the girls, considering all the evidence, the extraordinary community testimonials, and most importantly, observing the unique connection between Mr. Huntington and Madison and Harper. This court not only finds no reason to prevent the official formation of this family, but considers it a privilege to be part of this historic moment. The sound of the gavel was almost entirely drowned out by the eruption of joy that swept through the room. The twins ran into Richard's arms, forming a family embrace that made even the most cynical reporters wipe away tears. Hours later, at the Huntington mansion, an intimate celebration took place in the Peony Garden. Richard had made an important announcement earlier, the creation of the Elizabeth Huntington Foundation, which would vastly expand the company's social programs, focusing especially on vulnerable children. Liz always said some flowers need extra help to bloom, he explained to reporters. Now I realize she wasn't just talking about her peonies, but at that moment, seated among her favorite flowers with a daughter on each side, he was focused solely on reading The Little Prince, the book Elizabeth used to read whenever she needed to reconnect with what was truly important. What is essential is invisible to the eye, he read softly into the evening air. One sees clearly only with the heart. Liz always said that, Madison murmured sleepily, snuggling closer. So did the kind lady, Harper added, the ring around her neck glowing gently under the first stars. Richard kissed each of his daughters on the forehead, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. Above them, the Cassiopeia constellation began to glimmer in the velvet sky, as if Elizabeth was smiling at her finally complete family. The Cassiopeia ring had fulfilled its mission, not only connecting past and present, but guiding 3 lonely souls to the love that had always been destined for them. And in the depths of the garden, the blue peonies swayed softly in the night breeze, guarding the secrets of a love story that transcended time, death, and even fate, Daddy, Madison murmured. Already nearly asleep, tell that story again, about how you met Mommy in the library. Richard smiled, closing The Little Prince and pulling the girls closer. Well, it was an autumn evening, and I spilled coffee on the only white dress she had, and so, under a starry sky that seemed to wink in approval, a new family celebrated their very first official day together, while an old love story gained new chapters through the smiles and dreams of 2 little messengers who had found their way home.